What does it mean to walk with someone all the way to the river? To love them so completely that you share their most painful truths, their darkest moments, and even their final breath? Elizabeth Gilbert's All the Way to the River is not just a memoir of grief. It's a raw, unflinching story of love, addiction, codependency, spirituality, and recovery. Today, we'll journey through her book together, chapter by chapter, and uncover the lessons it offers about how we live, how we love, and how we let go. Elizabeth Gilbert, best known for Eat, Pray, Love, wrote this book in the aftermath of losing her partner, Rhea Elias. But All the Way to the River is not simply about death, it's about the messy, complicated beauty of living. Through prayers, journal entries, reflections, and memories, Gilbert paints an unguarded portrait of herself and Rhea, their love, their flaws, their addictions, their humor, and their humanity. This is not a polished love story. It's the truth, with all its rough edges intact. Section 1, an invocation. The book begins like a prayer. Gilbert repeats, I came to believe. Each line mirrors the stages of recovery. First, she admits her presence, she exists. Then, she wakes up, she came to. Finally, she opens herself to the belief that a power greater than herself could restore her. This rhythmic, almost liturgical opening sets the tone. The journey will be spiritual, raw, and grounded in recovery principles. It signals that what follows is not just memoir, it is invocation, confession, and testimony. Section 2, a visitation. On her 54th birthday, Gilbert feels Rhea's presence return. After years of silence since her partner's death, suddenly, Rhea is really there, not as a ghost, but as an overwhelming current of energy and voice. Gilbert writes down everything Rhea says, to stay sober, to stop babysitting others, to live her own life, to go all the way. The chapter is electric, mixing humor and profanity, Rhea teasing Gilbert about her frizzy hair, with tenderness and spiritual instruction. The encounter feels like a supernatural pep talk, urging Gilbert to live free of neediness and dependency. Section 3. When people ask me, who is Rhea? This section is a portrait of Rhea's life. Born in Aleppo, raised in Detroit, she grew up caught between two cultures, never fully American, never fully Middle Eastern. Rhea was wild, rebellious, a punk, a musician, a filmmaker, a hairdresser, an addict, and an irrepressible personality. Gilbert catalogues Rhea's contradictions. Tough yet tender, manipulative yet deeply loyal, destructive yet creative. Rhea lived boldly, often chaotically, and carried an aura that made her unforgettable. Through this portrait, readers see why Gilbert loved her and why her loss was shattering. Section 4. Where is comfort to be found? A lyrical, poetic meditation. Gilbert admits that comfort is not in music, nor in easy platitudes. Instead, comfort comes from recognizing that everything belongs to God. Grief, pain, shame, love, even mourning doves. Nothing is excluded. This chapter insists that healing is only possible when we stop rejecting parts of life and instead embrace the totality of experience, even the unbearable. Section 5. All the Way to the River. Here, Gilbert explains the metaphor that gives the book its title. Rhea used a map of New York City to describe intimacy. Casual friends are like Fifth Avenue friends. Closer friends live further east. But the rarest, deepest connection is the all-the-way-to-the-river friend, the one who knows your darkest secret, who stands by you through hospital visits, funerals, and breakdowns. Gilbert and Rhea were that for each other. Walking to the river is beautiful, but also dangerous. Intimacy at that level reveals painful truths, strips away illusions, and can shorten your life with its intensity. Yet it is also the purest form of love. Section 6. Relieve me from the bondage of self. This section is written as a prayer. Gilbert confesses how her resentments, opinions, and desires torment her. She acknowledges her futile attempts to control others and the exhaustion that comes from playing God. She begs for release from her self-centeredness, asking God to show her how to live. The chapter is raw, funny, and despairing, revealing how heavy the burden of ego can be. Section 7. Get your own life. Gilbert recalls first meeting Rhea in 2000, when she was still married. She went to Rhea for a haircut and immediately felt the force of Rhea's charisma. Rhea, in her leather pants and tattoos, contrasted sharply with Gilbert's buttoned-up appearance. They became friends, and Rhea impressed Gilbert with her independence. She worked 4 days a week so she could spend 3 days at the beach. When criticized, she snapped, "Get your own life." That boldness shocked Gilbert, who had never dared to set such boundaries. It planted a seed, the idea that she could live for herself. Section 8. I belong here. In this chapter, Gilbert turns inward. She admits, "Hi, my name is Lizzie, and I'm a sex and love addict." She details her desperate need for validation through relationships, her inability to feel whole without another person, her pattern of obsession and destruction. She names her addiction as a process addiction, just as destructive as Rhea's substance addiction. Yet in claiming her identity, she also claims her belonging, both in recovery communities and in her own story. Section 9. The God of my understanding. Gilbert describes her personal God. Not a king, not a father, not a lawgiver. Instead, her God is tender, humorous, spacious, fluid, beyond logic yet unmistakable. This chapter redefines spirituality as intimate and personal, not rigid or institutional. It's a God who delights in discovery and simply wants freedom for all. Section 10. A few helpful definitions before we continue. Here, Gilbert unpacks codependency. She describes it vividly, the compulsion to fix others, to abandon oneself, to confuse love with saving. She lays out its stages: the intoxicating beginning, "You complete me," the unraveling middle, "Why are you ruining your life before my eyes?" and the bitter end, "After all I've done for you." This definition is both clinical and biting, showing how codependency devastates both giver and receiver. Section 11, or perhaps we can see it this way. Gilbert reframes existence as a school for souls. Life's challenges, addiction, heartbreak, grief, are not punishments but lessons. We are here to learn, to stumble, to grow. This shift in perspective turns suffering into education and strips it of senseless cruelty. Section 12. Can I write you a check? This section reflects on the practicalities of Rhea's addiction and the financial burdens it imposed. Gilbert reveals her struggles with enabling, trying to help with money, but also recognizing how such gestures can feed dependency. The tension between generosity and enabling becomes a recurring theme. Section 13. Powerless. Gilbert confronts the hardest truth. She is powerless over Rhea's addiction. No matter how much she loves her, she cannot save her. This section echoes the first steps of recovery, acknowledging powerlessness and surrendering to a higher power. Section 14. Who will be my home? Here, Gilbert reveals her longing to find home in another person. She admits her pattern of believing that safety comes from being chosen, loved, or validated by someone else. But the chapter hints at a shift. Perhaps home must be found within. Section 15. A brief history of womanly overgiving. A critique of cultural conditioning. Gilbert explores how women are trained to overgive, to collapse under the weight of serving others, to define themselves by sacrifice. She situates her own patterns of codependency within this larger societal framework. Section 16. Public, private, secret. Gilbert examines the 3 layers of life: what we show the world, what we keep private, and what we keep secret even from ourselves. With Rhea, secrets spilled out. Their intimacy stripped away the boundaries, for better and for worse. Section 17. Why does your nose look like that? A brief but striking section. Gilbert recalls the painful self-consciousness and judgments that shape our identities. It reflects how even small insecurities and questions can pierce deeply, especially in the vulnerable context of love and addiction. Section 18. What's water? Borrowing from David Foster Wallace's metaphor, Gilbert reflects on awareness. Just as fish may not notice water, we often don't notice the forces that surround us: addiction, grief, love, culture, until they overwhelm us. This section invites reflection on the invisible currents shaping life. Section 19. A poem for Rhea, 1 year gone. A lyrical tribute marking the first anniversary of Rhea's death. Gilbert blends grief with celebration, holding on to Rhea's presence while acknowledging her absence. Section 20. Let me break it down for you. A direct, unfiltered section. Gilbert confronts her readers, and herself, with blunt honesty about addiction, codependency, and survival. She insists on clarity, stripping away illusions. Section 21. God pauses now and asks me to stay. A poetic meditation. Gilbert imagines God inviting her to simply stay, to stop running, to rest, to remain present in the painful moment instead of fleeing. Section 22. The Justification Factory. Gilbert critiques the mind's ability to rationalize anything. She calls it the Justification Factory, a relentless engine producing excuses for destructive behaviors. She examines how both she and Rhea were skilled at justifying their choices, even when those choices were deadly. Section 23. What's a trigger warning? A cultural reflection. Gilbert muses on the idea of trigger warnings, linking it to her own life. The world is full of triggers, especially for those in recovery. Rather than avoiding them, she must learn how to live with them. Section 24. Make your house into a temple. Gilbert reflects on creating sacred space. She urges readers to treat their own homes, bodies, and lives as temples, places worthy of care and reverence. It's a call to live intentionally, even in grief. Section 25. Rigid bitches. Blunt and humorous, this section critiques rigidity, both in others and herself. Gilbert acknowledges how inflexibility can be a mask for fear and how it strangles growth. Section 26. Turn it loose. A meditation on letting go. Gilbert insists that freedom comes when we stop clutching, controlling, and clinging. She writes of her own struggles to release her grip on Rhea, on outcomes, on illusions of safety. Section 27. The thing I don't want anyone knowing about me today. An exercise in radical honesty. Gilbert reveals a hidden truth about herself, one of those shameful secrets we all carry. By exposing it, she dissolves its power. The chapter embodies her commitment to truth-telling as a form of healing. Section 28. How to surrender. Gilbert outlines surrender not as defeat, but as strength. To surrender is to stop fighting reality, to stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and to open to grace. She shares how this principle saves her daily. Section 29. I'll be underneath the ground soon enough. A stark confrontation with mortality. Gilbert reflects on death, her own and Rhea's, and insists on the urgency of living authentically. Life is short, fragile, and precious. The awareness of death sharpens her commitment to sobriety and presence. Section 30. The Monkey Mind. Gilbert describes her restless, overthinking brain as a monkey leaping from branch to branch, rarely still. She confesses how this constant chatter fuels her anxiety, her cravings for control, and her addictive patterns. Recovery, she learns, is partly about calming the monkey mind through prayer, writing, and conscious presence. Section 31. A prayer for the addict who still suffers. A heartfelt invocation. Gilbert prays not only for herself but for anyone still trapped in addiction, including those who may never escape. She reminds readers that compassion must extend even to the ones who relapse endlessly, because no soul is beyond love. Section 32. A story about Rhea and her shoes. A lighter moment amid grief. Gilbert recalls Rhea's obsession with shoes, outrageous boots, flashy sneakers, impractical heels. Shoes became both armor and art for Rhea, symbols of her defiance and flair. Through this story, Gilbert captures Rhea's humor and style, the way she embraced life with bravado even in brokenness. Section 33. The Central Phobia of My Life. Gilbert admits her deepest fear, abandonment. She recognizes how it shaped her romantic choices, her codependency, and her constant need for reassurance. This section is raw, an acknowledgement that beneath all her seeking is terror of being left behind. Section 34, just for today. Borrowed from recovery mantras, this section highlights the importance of living one day at a time. Gilbert explains how overwhelming it is to imagine staying sober forever or grieving forever. But she can manage just for today. The mantra becomes her anchor. Section 35. Meeting myself where I am. Gilbert shifts tone to self-compassion. Instead of judging her failures, she practices meeting herself in her current state, whether broken, angry, or despairing. She insists this practice is essential for recovery. You cannot heal if you refuse to acknowledge where you actually stand. Section 36. The Ways I Have Tried to Save People. A brutally honest inventory. Gilbert recounts all the misguided ways she has tried to rescue others, offering money, advice, housing, romance, and even spiritual wisdom. Each attempt was rooted in ego and desperation, not true love. She admits that her compulsion to save others is itself an addiction. Section 37. What I have learned from Rhea's death. Here, Gilbert extracts lessons from the most painful event of her life. She learns that love cannot prevent death, that grief never disappears, and that presence matters more than solutions. Rhea's death stripped Gilbert of illusions but also deepened her humanity. Section 38. An inventory of my resentments. Following recovery traditions, Gilbert makes a list of her resentments. She names the people, events, and institutions she blames for her pain. But the exercise is transformative. By writing them down, she sees how much energy she wastes feeding grudges. The inventory becomes a tool of release. Section 39. Do I want to be right, or do I want to be free? A pivotal question. Gilbert realizes that clinging to righteousness, wanting to win arguments, prove her worth, expose others, keeps her chained. Freedom requires surrendering the need to be right. This insight marks a turning point in her spiritual practice. Section 40. A letter to my higher power. In an intimate, almost childlike tone, Gilbert writes a letter to God. She confesses her fears, thanks God for small mercies, and asks for strength. The act of writing to the divine makes her feel held, as though she is in conversation with a loving friend. Section 41. Rhea and the dishwasher. A story of domestic chaos. Gilbert recalls Rhea's stubborn refusal to load the dishwasher properly. What seems like a trivial fight becomes symbolic. Two people with different instincts for order colliding daily. Gilbert uses the anecdote to show how intimacy reveals quirks that can both amuse and infuriate. Section 42. What is enough? A meditation on sufficiency. Gilbert wrestles with her endless hunger for love, for reassurance, for more. She asks what enough really means and whether she can ever find contentment without seeking more. The question lingers as an open wound and a guiding star. Section 43. What I did with my rage. Gilbert confronts the anger she long suppressed. She admits she directed it at herself, at Rhea, at God, at anyone nearby. This section is raw and explosive but also cathartic. Rage, she learns, must be expressed honestly to be transformed. Section 44. What I did with my grief. Paired with rage, grief becomes the other great weight Gilbert carries. She writes about sobbing uncontrollably, isolating, collapsing into despair. But she also describes grief as sacred, a proof of love. Her grief for Rhea becomes a kind of altar she visits daily. Section 45. The myth of closure. Gilbert rejects the idea that grief has an endpoint. There is no moving on, only moving forward while carrying the loss. Closure, she argues, is a myth we tell to make grief less frightening. But real love leaves permanent marks. Section 46. A list of things I cannot control. Like a recovery assignment, Gilbert lists everything beyond her control. Other people's choices, the past, the future, death, the weather, traffic, outcomes. The list is long, humbling, and liberating. It teaches her to stop wasting energy on battles she cannot win. Section 47. A story about sobriety. Gilbert shares the moment she finally chose sobriety, not dramatic, but ordinary. She simply realized she couldn't keep numbing herself and still survive. Sobriety, she emphasizes, is not glamorous. It is daily work, built on humility and repetition. Section 48. Where does the shame go? A profound question. Gilbert admits she has carried shame like a hidden infection for decades, about her addictions, her failures, her relationships. She explores whether shame dissolves through confession, through love, or through divine grace. The answer is not simple, but the asking itself is healing. Section 49. How I keep myself steady. Practical wisdom. Gilbert lists her daily practices: writing, prayer, meetings, walking, cooking simple meals, reaching out to friends. These humble rituals form her foundation. Recovery is not built on grand gestures, but on ordinary steadiness. Section 50. I am a seeker. Gilbert names herself as a seeker, restless, searching, hungry for truth. She accepts that this is her nature. While seeking has led her into danger and obsession, it has also fueled her creativity and resilience. The chapter reframes seeking not as a flaw but as a vocation. Section 51. The disease of control. Gilbert dissects her obsession with control, controlling people, outcomes, narratives. She admits how exhausting it is, and how often it backfires. The disease of control, she says, is as destructive as any substance addiction. Recovery demands loosening her grip. Section 52. A story about the hospital. She recalls one of Rhea's hospitalizations. Machines beeping, doctors rushing, Gilbert terrified. The scene highlights both the fragility of life and the helplessness of caregivers. Gilbert writes with unsparing honesty about her fear and her inability to change the outcome. Section 53. The lie of self-sufficiency. Gilbert challenges the cultural myth that we can heal alone. She insists that we need each other, that recovery is communal. Her own survival depends on meetings, friendships, and divine support. Self-sufficiency, she argues, is a lie that isolates and kills. Section 54. How I Pray. An intimate, instructional section. Gilbert shares her prayer practices, speaking aloud, writing, whispering, sometimes cursing, sometimes laughing. Her prayers are informal, like conversations with a trusted friend. Prayer, she explains, is less about formality and more about honesty. Section 55. A poem for Rhea, 2 years gone. Another lyrical interlude. Gilbert marks the second anniversary of Rhea's death with a poem. The words blend sorrow and gratitude, portraying love as something that continues across time and space. Section 56. What I mean when I say I am a love addict. Gilbert defines her process addiction in detail. Love addiction, she explains, is not about romance but about compulsion, the inability to exist without the thrill of pursuit, the validation of being desired. It is about obsession, withdrawal, craving. Naming it gives her power over it. Section 57. What I mean when I say I am a sex addict. Building on the previous section, Gilbert speaks candidly about her compulsive patterns around sex. She explains how it's not about joy or intimacy, but about chasing relief from anxiety and emptiness. Her honesty is unflinching, meant to strip shame of its secrecy. Section 58. The Trap of Fantasies. Gilbert describes how fantasies of perfect love, perfect salvation, perfect endings ensnared her. She reflects on how she built illusions about Rhea and about herself, only to be shattered. Fantasies, she realizes, are prisons that keep her from living in reality. Recovery requires dismantling them. Section 59. How I Fall in Love. Gilbert explores her pattern of falling in love instantly and intensely. She admits she doesn't ease into love but leaps headfirst, often confusing obsession with intimacy. This section dissects the adrenaline rush of infatuation, exposing how addictive and destructive it can be. Section 60. What My Addiction Has Cost Me. A sobering inventory. Gilbert lists the emotional, financial, and spiritual costs of her addictions. Failed relationships, lost time, broken trust, diminished health. The losses are vast, but acknowledging them becomes the first step toward freedom. Section 61. How I Repair Myself. Gilbert explains how she must now act as her own parent, providing structure, discipline, and comfort. Instead of chasing chaotic love, she learns to nurture herself with routines, rest, and gentleness. Reparenting becomes a key to healing. Section 62. A story about Rhea and the ocean. She recalls a day with Rhea at the beach. Rhea dove into the waves fearlessly, while Gilbert hesitated. The story becomes metaphor. Rhea lived boldly, recklessly, while Gilbert often held back. Their dynamic reflected these differences, and grief sharpens the lesson. Life demands courage. Section 63. What I Am Learning About Intimacy. Gilbert distinguishes true intimacy from addiction. Real intimacy, she learns, is slow, patient, built on truth rather than thrill. It requires showing up daily, not losing oneself in the other. This section represents one of Gilbert's most profound shifts in understanding love. Section 64. A Prayer for Release. Another prayer, written with aching honesty. Gilbert asks for release from obsession, shame, and fear. She pleads for freedom from the compulsion to fix others. The prayer reads like a cry for divine rescue. Section 65. Rhea and the Couch. A humorous and tender memory. Gilbert recalls Rhea's attachment to a battered old couch she refused to throw away. The couch becomes symbolic of Rhea's stubbornness and her refusal to conform to anyone else's standards. Gilbert reflects on the charm and frustration of that trait. Section 66. Why am I like this? Gilbert digs into the roots of her behaviors, tracing them back to childhood wounds, cultural conditioning, and temperament. But she admits the answer is complicated, perhaps unanswerable. What matters is not why she is this way, but how she can heal now. Section 67. A list of things that make me feel better. Simple, grounding practices. Hot baths, walks in nature, coffee with friends, music, prayer. Gilbert emphasizes that recovery is sustained not by dramatic insights, but by small daily comforts. Section 68. A story about Rhea and the cats. Rhea's fierce love for animals shines here. Gilbert recalls how Rhea treated stray cats with devotion, feeding them, sheltering them, even when she could barely care for herself. The story illustrates Rhea's deep compassion, which coexisted with her chaos. Section 69. What I do with my loneliness. Gilbert faces her solitude directly. Instead of numbing it with romance or distraction, she practices sitting with it, acknowledging its sharp edges. Over time, she learns loneliness can be transformed into spaciousness and even creativity. Section 70. What I do with my joy. Balancing the heaviness of grief, Gilbert writes about cultivating joy through laughter, writing, connection, and gratitude. Joy, she insists, is not frivolous. It is a form of survival. Section 71. The danger of romanticizing pain. Gilbert admits she once glamorized suffering, believing it gave her depth and artistry. Now, she sees this as dangerous. Pain is real and must be honored, but to idolize it is to prolong suffering unnecessarily. Section 72. A poem for Rhea, 3 years gone. A deeply moving poem marking the 3rd anniversary of Rhea's death. Gilbert writes with tenderness and longing, affirming that love endures even as time passes. Section 73. What I am learning about boundaries. Gilbert discusses the necessity of boundaries, something she once feared would make her unloving. Now, she understands boundaries as acts of love, both for herself and for others. They protect her sobriety and her sanity. Section 74. The gift of powerlessness. Gilbert reframes powerlessness not as weakness, but as liberation. By admitting she cannot control others or outcomes, she finds peace. Powerlessness becomes the gateway to serenity. Section 75. How I make amends. In recovery tradition, amends are crucial. Gilbert shares how she has apologized for past harms, not just with words, but with changed behavior. She acknowledges that some amends cannot be made directly, but living differently is itself an offering. Section 76. Rhea and the guitar. A memory of Rhea playing music, raw, passionate, imperfect. The guitar was her voice, her soul made audible. Gilbert remembers how music connected Rhea to life and to others, even as addiction pulled her away. Section 77. What I am learning about God. Gilbert deepens her exploration of spirituality. She admits her understanding of God keeps evolving, sometimes playful, sometimes silent, always mysterious. She surrenders to this fluidity, trusting that faith need not be fixed to be real. Section 78. How I practice acceptance. Acceptance, Gilbert explains, is not resignation but clarity. It is saying yes to reality as it is. She practices accepting death, addiction, grief, and her own limitations. Acceptance, though painful, is freedom. Section 79. What I do with my hope. Gilbert guards hope carefully, nurturing it without letting it become fantasy. Hope is grounded in small acts, sobriety today, love today, not in illusions of rescue. She treats hope as a discipline rather than a daydream. Section 80. What I am learning about forgiveness. Forgiveness, she admits, is hardest when directed toward herself. She learns to forgive her failures, her mistakes, and her relapses into old patterns. Forgiveness becomes a practice of self-liberation. Section 81. A story about Rhea and the dogs. Another tender vignette. Gilbert recalls Rhea's deep affection for dogs, their loyalty, their joy. Dogs became Rhea's teachers, embodying presence and unconditional love. The memory becomes both humorous and heartbreaking. Section 82. What I do with my gratitude. Gilbert closes in on gratitude as the cornerstone of her survival. She lists the people, memories, and small daily gifts she cherishes. Gratitude shifts her perspective from loss to abundance. Section 83. What I am learning about humility. Humility, Gilbert realizes, is not humiliation but truth-telling. It is admitting she is not the center of the universe, that she needs help, that she is human. Humility softens her, making her life livable. Section 84. What I am learning about love. Gilbert redefines love, not as possession or obsession, but as presence, honesty, and care. She acknowledges how much she misunderstood love before and how grief taught her its real meaning. Love, in the end, is about freedom. Section 85. A poem for Rhea, 4 years gone. A quiet, elegiac poem marking the 4th anniversary. Gilbert's words reveal enduring tenderness, sorrow, and resilience. Time does not erase love, it reshapes it. Section 86. What I am learning about grief. Gilbert reflects on grief as a lifelong companion. It no longer drowns her daily, but it remains part of her. She learns to live alongside it, to even find wisdom in its presence. Section 87. After all this, Rhea would like to respond. The book closes with an imagined response from Rhea, playful, sharp, and loving. Gilbert channels her partner's voice one last time, reminding her to laugh, to live, to stay sober, and to stop taking everything so seriously. The ending is both heartbreaking and comforting. Love continues in memory, humor, and imagination. All the Way to the River is a love letter, but it's also a cautionary tale. It's about how far we'll go for the people we love, and how sometimes the bravest act is to let them go. Gilbert reminds us that grief is not something to overcome but something to carry, something that shapes who we are. Her story is raw, painful, funny, and ultimately redemptive. If this book moved you, or if you've ever wrestled with love, loss, or addiction, take its message with you. You are not alone. You belong here. And perhaps that's the most healing truth of all.